So we're here today with Reverend Terry Chan, who's a missionary in San Francisco. Terry, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What was life like growing up?
Well, I'm kind of unique in a sense because my family first came to America in 1869. Mm-hmm. And my great-grandfather was born here in San Francisco. My grandmother was born here in San Jose. She went all the way through high school. She got married, and her husband took her back to China at the age of 25. And so she left and was pretty much planning to stay there. They ended up needing to flee from the communists in China. They settled in Hong Kong. They stayed there for a while. She had her children. My mother was born there. And after about 25 years, she decided, I'm going back to my family in America. And so I was already born. So I was born in Hong Kong, and my whole family came back over to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is that some of my family in San Francisco, because they have been here for 4 or 5 generations, they were, some were bilingual, but some did not speak anything other than English. And then on my father's side, some came over after us, and they only spoke Chinese. And so I was kind of in this bilingual setting where sometimes I had to speak Chinese, sometimes English. So I spoke Chinese at home, but it was very fun growing up in that kind of environment, getting the best of both cultures.
Oh, what about church? Were you always a Christian?
No. I did not grow up in a Christian home environment at all. Matter of fact, when I was younger, my junior high school age, I was involved on the periphery of some gang activities. I knew a lot of friends that were involved in shootings, people who were killed, just a bad time.
Chinese gangs.
Chinese gangs.
And you had no church, no church. Buddhism or Christianity?
Well, our family kind of called themselves Buddhists. They had various statues and things like that at home. Mm-hmm. I was responsible for dusting them off, and we were such lousy Buddhists. I did not even know those were idols and shrines I was supposed to be worshiping. So we never went to temple. The only thing about my family in that sense was they never talked about death. Death was just something they would not talk about. And because of these people that I knew, these gang members that were killed, I began to have some questions about life and death. I mean, what happens after death? And then I had 2 grandparents pass when I was around junior high age, and that really raised the level of my questions. And we went to 2 Buddhist funerals, and it was just crying and sobbing and burning incense, and I was like really creeped out. I'm saying, this is not good news at all. Mm-hmm. And through all of that, we still never had any conversations about death. It just wasn't talked about. I shared a bedroom with 2 brothers, and 2 of us slept in a bunk bed. The bunk bed was in the corner, and one end was blocked off by a dresser, and then there was a sheet then that covered my bed. And so one night I'm laying in my bed, and I'm surrounded all 4 corners. There's no light. It's enclosed, and I said, this feels like a coffin. And just the thought about death came up again, and I said, I wonder what it's like if you die. And so I held my breath, trying to see if I could put myself to death, I guess. So after 2 minutes, I was gasping for air, but I was wondering, boy, death would be just so awful. No hope, that's it. And so I grew up with those kinds of thoughts, never having any kind of answers to that.
And so when did you get connected to the church?
Well, what happened was, after seeing some of these friends involved in gangs get killed, I said, I need to do something else. I need to kind of get out of that. So I diverted my attention to sports. I got involved with some sports and, just getting out on the playground and playing. And I met one guy on the ball field, and we became friends, and we would start to hang out and do things together.
How old were you?
I at that time I was about 16, 17 years old. And I would go out and do things, but he was never available on Friday nights or on Sunday mornings. And so I was kidding him. I said, "No, are you hiding a girlfriend from me or something? How come you're always busy?" He finally confesses to me, almost half embarrassed. He says, "Well, I go to church. I go to a fellowship group on Friday nights, and I go to worship on Sundays." I said, "Church? Really?" I was really curious. What is that? What do you do there? But he didn't invite me. I was like, if you would have said, "Come to church," I would have just jumped on it. And so it just kind of lingered for months. And finally, my senior year of high school, Christmas break, he finally says, "My youth group is going bowling. Would you like to come and meet some of my friends?" He didn't invite me to church. He invited me to a youth group event. And so I said, "Oh, sure, I'd like to go check out your friends." So I went, and I met a few friends, and then I met a deaconess. She was the youth worker, and she asked me, "Do you know the real meaning of Christmas?" And she began to tell me the Christmas story about Jesus and why he really came. And so for the first time I was hearing something about the gospel, something related to the church. And then after that, I left. I didn't stay around too long. But my friend never asked me, "What do you think about my friends? Would you like to come to church?" He never invited me. It wasn't until the following spring, right before Good Friday, my friend says, "Would you like to come to a Good Friday service with me?" Finally, he invites me to something at church. And so I say, "Yeah, I'd like to go. I'll go with you." Not knowing what a Good Friday service is or what Good Friday is about. So it was just something I was very curious about. And so I remember that day very well. We made some sandwiches. We ate lunch at the park, and then we walked down to a Woolworth, and he bought some Easter lilies, and he was bringing them to the church for a Good Friday 1 o'clock service. And we walked up the stairs of the church. We're kind of in the narthex there, and he tells me to wait, and he brings the flowers inside the sanctuary. I'm standing there by myself in this church for the first time, and I hear someone say, "Hi, Terry, welcome to our church." And I'm going like, "No, who is this? Who knows me here?" And I turn around, and who is it but that youth worker, that deaconess who had shared the gospel with me, told me about Christmas, had been encouraging my friend to invite me to church. She recognizes me on sight. I learned that she had been praying for me every day since then. She knew in her mind what I looked like. She knew me on sight, saw the back of my head, she knew my name.
Now, was that Amy Moy?
No, that was Carol Halter.
Oh, Carol Halter.
Carol Halter. She's now a missionary in China.
In China.
Yes, yeah. So that was
a great story.
Yeah, she's got a great story.
Yeah.
And so
Carol.
lo and behold, I come to a Good Friday service, and what do they talk about? Death. All right. So I have all these questions about death, and all of a sudden I'm hearing, well, there's death, and you know what? There's life, and there's forgiveness, and there's eternal life. And I'm going like, wow, I want to hear more about this, And so my friend didn't invite me, but others said, "Come back to our Friday night fellowship group." And I said, "I'll be there." Then at the fellowship group, they told me, "A bunch of us are staying overnight at the church tomorrow night, Holy Saturday." and then we're going to Golden Gate Park for an Easter sunrise service. Would you like to stay? I don't know these people. Sure, I'll come. So next time I come back, I stay up all night singing songs, hearing scripture, hearing testimonies. Next morning I go to Golden Gate Park to do this whole dramatization of the resurrection, and I'm like, wow, this is powerful. And so I go to my first Easter sunrise service. We went and had my first Easter breakfast. I went to my first Sunday school class. I went to my first Easter service, and it was just a tremendous 3-day experience from Good Friday to Easter, and so that was my first exposure to church.
To Christianity.
To Christianity.
Was it in Chinese or English?
It was a bilingual church in Chinese and in English. And so it was, so I got to hear it twice. It was preached in Chinese and then translated into English, or vice versa. It was preached in English and then translated into Chinese.
So okay, so you're 16, 17 years old maybe now. How do you get into the path towards the ministry, to pastoral ministry? It
was just a part of my ongoing discipleship. I became a Christian. It was, again, on Good Friday and Easter, I came to church. And so I just kept going to church, kept asking questions. And by Pentecost, just prior to that, Carol asked me, she says, do you believe in Jesus? And I said, I certainly do. She asked, would you like to be baptized on Pentecost Day?
Wow.
And I said, absolutely.
Wow.
Right? So I went and told my parents, I said, can I be baptized? And they said, well, you sure? You just started going not long ago. Pentecost, right? Not that far apart. And I said, yeah, I'm ready. So I was baptized on Pentecost Day. So I didn't go through 2 years of catechism. I knew the basics, and immediately I was baptized. And I went through a lot of study and so on. But I just got very involved in the church, just wanting to serve. That was just a part of what it meant to be a Christian. So I was involved in some different things. I was learning. I was a new Christian, a young Christian. I was trying to figure all things out from being, wow, I'm really good now. I'm all self-righteous, and then I went through a period of just being legalistic. But as I grew, I finally realized it was about serving people and serving God. And I just did all kind of odd jobs around the church with the pastor, Pastor Wilbur Holt, a sainted mentor of mine. One day we were just setting mouse traps around the church because we had some mice in the house. Another time I would go with Carol and we would do ministry down in Chinatown. We would go to playgrounds. We would play with the kids for an hour, running around until they were tired out. Then we sat down and said, would you like to hear a Bible story? And they would say, yeah, we'd love to. And we would tell them Bible stories. And so we just did all those kinds of things. And I just wanted to be useful, to help in whatever way and to serve. And I was a new Christian. I was not very eloquent of speech. I was not, pastor material, but that was something I thought about and I prayed about. And so I asked my parents about a couple years now after becoming a Christian. I asked my parents, I said, I'm now in college, right? And I asked my parents, can I go be a pastor? Right? What would be more pleasing to God than to be a pastor? Right? I'm sure God would honor that. And my parents said, no. They did not give me permission to be a pastor. And so I said, fine. I didn't give up. I looked into other programs, found there was a Director of Christian Education program, a DCE program. So I asked my parents, what if I studied to be a DCE? What is that? It's like a teacher, except instead of teaching in a school, you're teaching in a church. A teacher, okay, you can go be a teacher. And so I went to Concordia, Portland, and I studied to be a DCE. I did a year internship. I was served in the congregation for 4 years, and my parents were really happy. Self-supporting, got a college degree, wonderful. And like, most Chinese families, parents, well, how can you advance in your career? And I said, well, I can serve in a bigger church. I can go back and teach at the college. I can go be a pastor and have my own church. So they said, you can be a pastor and have your own church? You can go be a pastor now. And I said, maybe later. I like being a DC. And what I really learned about that was, that was really just God at work. I was not ready as a new Christian, go through training to be a DCE, then go on another 4 years and be a pastor. I wasn't ready for that. I needed those 4 or 5 years of working in the congregation, maturing in my faith, not stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. But by the time I was able to go to seminary, I was able to learn some more and mature more in my faith and allow God to really cultivate and mature me and disciple me some more. And so that was a blessing. So when I went to seminary, I just felt much more ready and adequate to do so.
Okay, so you graduate from seminary, and where was your first call?
Well, it was very interesting because I was praying about that. Where would I go? And should I go overseas? And the mission board says, no, we can't send you overseas.
Oh, you wanted to go to China.
And I thought about the possibility, and then on my vicarage, I went in New York City. The pastor took me up to a congregation up in Quincy, Massachusetts. And we had some consultation with them about starting a Chinese ministry. And I didn't think much of it. We did that. And then come placement time, I was placed in California, to a congregation that's closed, no longer there, way up in the woods in Northern California. And I said, okay, well, I guess that's where God wants me. A week later, the church up in Quincy calls me up and says, we got in our paperwork late, but we'd like to call you and have you come out to Quincy and serve. And a week after that, my home pastor at the Lutheran Church of the Holy Spirit in San Francisco, he says, don't go either one. Come back to San Francisco. I need you in San Francisco. And so I hadn't been back in my home congregation in 9 years. And so after much prayer and I finally was led to go back to San Francisco. And I served at that home church for another 7 years.
What were some of the highlights, challenges, pluses that you remember from that time?
Well, it was a time of tremendous growth for us. When I started, we had a very nice congregation, about 150, 180 people in worship, and by the time I left 7 years later, we were gathering over 300 people in worship. We baptized 60, 80 people during that time. It was just tremendous. Pastor Wilbur Holt.
Oh, Wilbur Holt.
Yeah, Wilbur Holt. Just
Anglo guy.
Anglo guy was a missionary. Anglo pastor. He had been a missionary in China, was kicked out in 49 when the communists took over, went down to Hong Kong and helped establish the work in Hong Kong, the seminary, the synod there, came back over to the United States in the 60s and started the congregation there, and that congregation truly did some great work. Wonderful congregation. It has been for a long time and still is the largest Chinese congregation in the Missouri Synod. Right, and there's.
So did you stay there very long? 7 years.
I was there for 7 years.
And then what happened?
And then one of the dreams was to become a church planting congregation. That was a vision I had for that. And so we partnered with a couple of our Lutheran churches and said, where else in San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area can we be planting some churches? And so we identified some areas, and I really was encouraging our congregations to move forward and being church becoming a church planting congregation. And so we partnered with the congregation. We partnered with, it was an English district congregation, and we partnered with our CNH congregation. And the English district took the lead, and they said they would call the missionary. And unknown to me, they turned around and issued a call to me to plant the church. And so I've never planted a church. I've never been trained to plant a church. I don't know if I can plant a church. And so that was just a real challenge. But I just felt a passion for doing that. I was leading the charge to go forward with that. And now they're saying, you know, put up or shut up, I guess. So I said, I accepted that call, and ventured out from the largest church with all the resources to no church and just a small group of supporters, and began. And the Lord blessed, and we were able to really just reach a
Where did you start?
number. It was also in San Francisco. It was about 7 miles away from the mother church, and it was in the area called the Sunset District, and that was New Life Chinese Lutheran Church, and that congregation continues to be very thriving today, and continues their ministry. They're not in that same area now. They've moved over to a different part of San Francisco, but ironically now Holy Spirit has moved into that location. So it's been a great complete circle in the ministry of that congregation and Asian Chinese work there.
What was the biggest challenge in starting the new church?
Keeping focused on the outreach. The first 2-3 years, we were really focused on outreach. All of our activities about outreach. If we developed programs, it was outreach programs. We would do canvassing. We would walk the neighborhoods, talk to people on the streets, gather people. We didn't have regular worship services for the whole first year. And once we did, we started to grow, and we started to gather people, and then by year 4 or so, you know, it was like, well, maybe it's time to start looking at some property and purchasing some property. We got moved around a little bit. You know, our first services were in a ballroom, a second-story ballroom, and people brought their own chairs. They would pull up, come to church early, open their trunk. We would carry chairs up to the second floor dance hall that was just cleaned up, and it would still smell like alcohol. But that's where we gathered, 100+ people, and we brought our own chairs to have a worship service. And then after the service, people would bring the chairs downstairs, pack them back up in their cars, store them in their garages or house or whatever, and that's what we did. Then we ended up renting a school gymnasium. It was great. We had a lot more room, but they never turned on the heat on the weekends, and so it was very cold. And so we were there for a year and a half, 2 years, and then we finally was able to rent a small church that was not in use, and did that. And so that people start to really just want a more permanent place they could call home. They could build a little more. But once we started to do that a little bit, it began to take some focus away from some of the mission activities.
A lot of times the goal becomes for the new church, the building and the property. And once we got that, okay, we have a church.
Yes.
But that's not the mission piece that you're talking about.
No. Not that we couldn't have used that. We were actually on track to try and use a preschool church planting model. But because of the high cost of property in San Francisco, we couldn't quite work out the finances to really do that. So the intentions were right, and certainly finding a more permanent church home would have helped that ministry to grow at that time too. So
then after that, after the New Start, what did you do?
Then some of the things I got involved in so I was at New Life for 7 years. Then I did some other work. I did some consulting work with our district. I helped start something called the Peninsula Asian Mission Society, and that was gathering a number of our congregations on the peninsula, the congregations south of San Francisco, because a lot of the people in San Francisco, the Chinese people, were moving down the peninsula towards Silicon Valley. And so I just saw some great opportunities for planting Chinese Asian ministry on the peninsula there. And so we began by developing a mission society, and there were about 6 congregations that got together.
Chinese and Anglo.
Chinese and Anglo. And
what did that accomplish? What did you guys do with it?
That mission society got started, and then I received another call, and I moved on. But that mission society did some early groundwork, preparing congregations, trying to help the congregations learn about the reality that there were substantial Asian people coming down into that area.
And less Anglo-Caucasian people.
Right. And so...
so you lit a fire under some of those churches.
We got them involved and brought mission awareness to them. And they began to do some mission work. And so I took a call and began serving in a different setting. I was taking 2 older, declining Anglo congregations, and they ended up merging together. And we wanted to relaunch that new ministry. And so we now became Christ for All Nations Lutheran Church, a multi-cultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual congregation. It's made up of a third Anglo, a third of Asian people from various backgrounds, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and a third African American.
Wow.
Yeah, so just that wonderful picture of what heaven will look like. And so so that's the congregation, but it's also located in a community that has become more and more Asian. And so now that population is about 60% Asian and 20% Hispanic. And so because of my familiarity with the Peninsula Asian Mission Society, we were able to partner together and use the missionary that had called, David Chan, and he came over and assisted me in starting a Chinese ministry in my multicultural English-speaking congregation.
So Chinese worship service?
We began, we have a very large food pantry ministry, and oftentimes we think about Asians being kind of a model immigrant group, high education and high income and employment and some of those things, and a lot of that is true, but we don't want to just stereotype them, because there are many who have other social needs, newer immigrants, they don't speak the language, seniors who sometimes are left alone at home. And so we were able to reach out to these people through a food pantry, a weekly food pantry that we've been doing now for more than a dozen years.
Demonstrating the love of Christ.
Demonstrating the love of Christ. And it's a weekly food pantry. At one point we had more than 700 people coming every week. And from that we drew and invited people to come hear the gospel. It was a worship service. The word was preached. We would teach them songs to sing, and really reach out to them. And we began to serve them. We designed after-school programs, English language opportunities, all kind of really good things to share the gospel with these people, just loving these people. And one of those clients that comes to the food pantry, he came and said to me, he had heard about the church, he had heard about the gospel, he had heard about God's love, but it was coming to this food pantry that for the first time he actually experienced and felt that love of God. And so this is one of those ministries where we're not gathering numbers and baptizing numbers and all becoming church members. This is one of those ministries where we're just loving people, planting seeds, reaching out to them, and we've been doing that for a number of years, and the Lord will bless and bring a harvest because of that work.
What's your vision for Chinese mission work in the United States?
There's some great work being done in the Chinese language, in Cantonese, Mandarin, Taiwanese. One of the great challenges coming up is recognizing the second generation, the 1.5, the 2.0 generation, and how will we continue serving them? How will we keep those we have from leaving the church, and how can we reach out to more second, third generation people?
So what's your answer?
My thought is that a model for us to look at more closely is developing an intentional second generation Pan-Asian church planting model, to take those who may be bilingual but who are predominantly English speaking, those who are from various cultures, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, Filipino, but who are sharing a common Asian culture, some of the same Asian values, and what brings them together is their appreciation of other Asian cultures. So you'll find this sometimes on college campuses, where groups like Asian American Christian Fellowship will gather, and these kids, these young people gather together. One weekend they'll go off for Chinese food, another they'll go off for sushi, third is they'll go off for japchae. So they just enjoy all those various Asian cultures, and what brings them together is English. And so a church planting model would be a Pan-Asian second generation church model, where there is a future for their children
Speaking English.
who are going to be English speaking
And American.
Because some have left the native language speaking congregations because they have not felt welcome there. Oh, why don't you speak better Chinese or better Korean? And they don't quite fit in some English congregations because, well, as I've been asked many times, where did you learn to speak such good English? So there's some comfort level that sometimes is uncomfortable. But this will allow them to build a church that has a future for their children, knowing that as they go forward, it will probably become more multi-ethnic.
More multi-ethnic.
And yet, at the same time, all of these Pan-Asian people, they have relatives, they have friends, acquaintances who are still from the home country, who might still speak the native language. And so when there's opportunity, we can bridge back and find mission opportunities in those languages. And so this sandwich generation, I think, has some great potential to really be a church planting model that can go backward and forward.
What an exciting vision for the future, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. God bless your ministry.